All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome,
Hello.
welcome. We are going to speak about two different topics today. We're going to speak about prayer as our main topic for today, as I mentioned last week. But I also want to spend just a little bit of time on the holiday of Purim, which was last night and today. Um, for those of you who saw me last night, a few of you did. I was all dressed up in costume, and I came today. I was dressed up in costume as well for the preschool and stuff like that. So let's talk a little bit about the holiday of Purim, just so that we know about it as we move through. So Purim. When we speak about Purim, the holiday is actually based on the story of the Book of Esther. Right? The Book of Esther is a biblical book. You can find it in the Hebrew Bible. You can find it in the Christian Bible as well. And the story sort of goes as follows. Haman, the evil Haman, plotted to kill all of the Jews. Esther, who was a Jew, became queen with the help of her uncle Mordecai. And she was ultimately able to save the Jews from Haman's plots. And then ultimately the victory was codified. And then as a celebration for all of the ages. And that's what we do. And that is why we celebrate this day. And for those who were there with us last night at the traditional service, we actually read the entire book of Esther. There's 10 chapters. And we read it all the way through, beginning to end, as we went. And it was a little crazy, and we had some fun with the melodies. That in terms of leading the services, I changed the melodies around, and we had some fun. In the earlier service, some of you were at the earlier service with the kids. That's a little bit, that is meant to be organized or disorganized chaos. That's just what Purim is with the kids. And it's a lot of fun, and it's crazy, and it's noisy, and it's wild. And we had a Purim parade, and we have all sorts of things. And then the later service has the full Megillah reading and those sorts of things that we had. So some people stayed for both. Some people only came for one or the other. But let's talk about what Purim is. And there are 4 different mitzvot, 4 different commandments that we talk about when celebrating the holiday of Purim. The first is reading the book of Esther. Now, the Megillah, the scroll of Esther, is actually the only other book that we read, other than the Torah, that we read from a scroll. Any of the other books that we read, whether it be a Haftorah or whether it be other Megillot, other books on Sukkot or Shavuot or the other holidays, we can read just from a codex, from our regular book. But we read last night from a scroll, and it is written the same way that a Sefer Torah, that a Torah scroll is written, on parchment. The second mitzvah is what's called Seudat Purim, or a Purim mitzvah meal. And we're supposed to have a nice big meal on Purim to celebrate. It's a feast, right? We're supposed to celebrate the victory. We then have what are called Mishloach Manot, and it's an opportunity to give gifts, usually food types of gifts to other people. Some people really will go out and will make all sorts of different food products and put them into nice little packages and bring them to their friends and deliver them all over the place. It's a wonderful custom to do. And the last is Matanot Le'Evyonim, is to give some tzedakah, to give gifts to the poor. So not only gifts to your friends and the people in your community, but to also think about making sure that those people who have less than we do have the opportunity to get those gifts as well. Those are the 4 we call the 4 mitzvot of Purim, the 4 commandments of Purim. There are some additional customs too that I want to focus in on. We did not do this at the kids service, but at the adult service, we had some alcohol that was there. It's actually a custom to drink alcohol on Purim for those who can. There are some people who can't or shouldn't, and that's okay. But for those who can, it's a custom to drink alcohol. Now, where does this come from? It comes from a strange phrase that we have that we're supposed to celebrate ad de lo yada, which means until we don't know. Now, what does that mean? Until we don't know? Well, the rabbi said, until we don't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai. Right? Now, how do you do that? Well, one way to do that is having some nice Purim juice, as we said the other day, and having some alcohol so that you can celebrate. I don't recommend anybody getting that drunk that you can't tell the difference between Haman and Mordechai. But it is an opportunity to celebrate and to have something to drink. And definitely alcohol, if you go to a traditional synagogue, alcohol flows very profusely as we go. So drinking alcohol is a custom that we have. It's not a halacha, it's not a law, but it's something that you'll find very often, alcohol connected with Purim. As I said, those people who came to the first service, we're obviously not going to have alcohol out while those kids are running around. It really was reserved for the second service. The other custom that we have is eating hamantashen. Now, what's interesting is hamantashen are basically Haman cookies, right? And there are these triangular cookies that you can see there that are supposedly the shape of Haman's hat, right? Which was a three-pointed hat. What's interesting is historically, they were originally made out of poppy seeds. Now they're made out of all sorts of different stuff. I'm still an old guy. I like my poppy seed hamantashen. But now you've got jam, all sorts of jam, strawberry and apricot, and people use chocolate and all sorts of really delicious. My wife sometimes will put halva in the middle of it and make it, which is really spectacular. But the original cookie was made out of poppy seeds. Now, why is that important? Because the original name was not hamantashen, but muntashen. Mun is poppy seed. The original name of this was a poppy seed cake or poppy seed cookie, right? And eventually it sounded like Haman, right? And so it became a hamantashen, and it became this very traditional cookie that we have on Purim. If you go to Jewish bakeries, you'll find it. If you were here last night, you saw we had lots of them all over until the kids got to them, and then there was none left. Any questions on Purim? I just want, like I said, I just wanted to get a little bit of a background on what happened yesterday and today. We're already sort of over because it's the nighttime, but I just wanted to do that. Courtney.
Did you say last night that the mitzvot was actually hearing the Megillah versus reading it?
Yes. Yeah. So the mitzvah is to hear the Megillah, because not everybody's reading it. Right. And so for us, it's to hear the Megillah being read. If you know how to read it, then great. You can come and do that as well. But the true mitzvah is actually just to hear it. You don't have to read it yourself. Good question, Courtney. Anybody else? All right. Nancy?
Yeah. How did the drinking thing become part of this? Is there
so it is about, so here, let me add one more piece, and then that may help with the drinking, right? Purim is about unbridled, unrestrained joy. And that's really where the drinking comes in, right? Unbridled, unrestrained joy. Now, what's interesting is about 6 months from now, right, the other side of the year, we have another holiday, which is a fast day called Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the other side of the equation. It is unbridled, unrestrained sadness. It's the saddest day of the year. It's a fast day. It's the day that we mourn all of these sorts of things. And what's interesting as we start to teach the calendar, right, that these are on opposite sides of the year, is our tradition is teaching us that we need to maintain a balance in our lives. Unrestrained sadness is not a way that we can live. Unrestrained joy is not a way that we can live either. We cannot live every day as if it were Purim. And therefore, we find that balance in the center for the rest of the year. But we sort of have one day on each extreme to create that release valve or pressure release to let everything out, right? And that's really where we see Purim and Tisha B'Av on both sides. So the unrestrained joy, the rabbis, for whatever reason, said alcohol. That's the way to do it. It certainly takes away inhibitions.
Yeah.
I've seen many a rabbi, riding around in a gorilla suit on roller skates on Purim and stuff. I mean, it's an opportunity to let your hair down, so to speak, and not worry about it.
But we also do a l'chaim on Shabbat too. So
yeah, look, alcohol is definitely joyful. It's a symbol of joy, but that's more restrained. We don't do lots of shots. We just do a l'chaim.
Mm-hmm.
On the bris, you drink wine.
Well, we drink wine at every holiday, right? We drink wine on Shabbat. We drink 4 cups of wine on Passover, which is coming up in a month. So wine is definitely joy. Wine is a symbol of joy within our tradition. And so Purim, we overdo it, right? We overdo it. Not so me anymore. I feel like I'm getting too old to do that. In the olden days, I used to overdo it. Now I want to just be able to put my feet up and go home and not have to worry about how I feel the next morning. All right. Any other Purim questions before we get on to prayer, which is our topic for today? All right. So let's go. What is prayer? I set this up last week as 2 sides of a dialogue. I said that revelation was the way that we find out, that we hear what God wants of us and how God communicates to us. And prayer is our opportunity, at least on the surface, to respond back, to add our voice to that conversation. I don't think prayer is the only way we add ourselves into the conversation. I think our observance of mitzvot, our actions also add to the conversation. But prayer is a good starting point. And it's one of the foundational sort of pillars of synagogue life, right? There's 2, a synagogue is actually known by 3 different names. Synagogue is known as a Beit Tfilah, which is a house of prayer, as a Beit Midrash, which is a house of study, and a Kihila, or a Beit Knesset, as a house of gathering. So we've got social, we've got learning, we've got spiritual prayer, and all of those are the pillars and foundations of a synagogue. So this is one of the major pillars. We do this a lot here. So prayer is the term that we use as to how we communicate with God. And in Judaism, there are really 2 types of prayer that we see. The first is what we call spontaneous prayer, right? This is, we see something, we feel something, and we just pray. Now, what's interesting, we're going to talk more about this later, is we as Jews have moved away from spontaneous prayer. And Christianity, especially evangelical Christianity, has really embraced spontaneous prayer, right? As the primary means of communicating with God. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, and I'll tell you a funny story later. But this has a history going all the way back to the Bible. This is not a Christian invention, so to speak. And a lot of Jews feel that way. Oh, spontaneous prayer. No, we don't do that. Give me a prayer book. Tell me what I'm supposed to say. I'll say the Shema. I'll say the Amidah. That's prayer. Well, actually, going all the way back to Moses, right? Moses, when his sister was struck down with leprosy, Moses, in a very short, spontaneous prayer, said, El na rafana la, please God, heal her. A clear example of spontaneous prayer. He felt a need, he spoke to God. So that is a part of who we are as Jews. But what we know most about prayer from the Jewish perspective is what we call fixed prayer, or prayer that is kavua. Kavua is the Hebrew word for fixed. And we know that because our tradition has specific times, 3 times daily, and specific prayers that are then said during those times. What are the 3 times? We have Shacharit, which is the morning service.
Yeah.
We have Mincha, which is the afternoon service. And we have Ma'ariv, which is the evening service. Those are the 3 times a day that we pray. So morning service can be done anytime from when the sun first starts to rise, a little bit of light in the sky, until sort of early afternoon. Then we switch over to the afternoon service, which can be done basically until it gets dark. And then anytime at night, anytime while it's dark, you can do the evening service. The first 2 services are actually based on the daily offerings that were made in the temple, right? The temple was destroyed in the year 70 by the Romans, and we picked up on the worship that was in the temple by bringing it into our own private lives, not having it be at the temple anymore with sacrifice, but we now bring it into our private lives with these prayer services. And there were 2 daily offerings, Shacharit and Mincha. The early morning offering and the afternoon offering. The evening, there was no offering at night, actually. We only did the offerings during the day. So some people say, well, wait a second then. Why do we have 3 services? Maybe we should just have 2 services. So the 3rd service actually comes because we say, one of our primary prayers that we say is the Shema. The Shema is a prayer that says we say these words when we rise up and when we lie down. Actually, it's the other way, when we lie down and when we rise up. So that indicates we say the Shema at night and in the morning. So once we're saying the Shema every night, that created a need for a communal prayer service as well. But there are differences between the prayer services. So in the morning and in the afternoon service, when we say the Amidah, the sort of the central part of our service, we say it out loud as a community because there was communal sacrifice. At night, the Amidah is always said silently because there was no communal offering. It's just a personal offering. So that's where we get the 3 services that we have, those foundational services. Any questions on that?
I have a question. What does the word Shema? Is that God?
Shema, yeah, the Shema means hear.
What?
Hear.
Oh, hear. Oh, hear. Shema.
Right? Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel. The Lord is our God, the Lord is one. That's what the word Shema means. So as we talk about our services, put it in a context that most people understand, I argue that a good service is like a good workout routine, right? You can't just jump into the high impact stuff right away. You'll hurt yourself, right? So we need to have a warm up, then we have the high impact, then we have the cool down. And so a good service is going to have that same structure, even if it's a short service, right? Afternoon service, really short. You have 1 or 2 introductory prayers to warm up. Then you have the Shema. Then you have the Amidah. Then you go into some cool down prayers and you're done. Shabbat, it's going to be more extended, longer introductory prayers. Couple of peaks for high impact, right? We have the first Amidah, then we have the Torah service, then we have a Musaf Amidah. So on Shabbat, we have 3 peaks for the high impact, right? and then the cool down prayers at the end. But as you look at the service, they're always going to be introduction, main prayers, closing, cool down. And depending on what's going on, it'll be longer or shorter. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, it's a very extended service. So as we look at these, what we see is that the introductory prayers, right, are usually psalms and different readings or poems that the rabbis have created throughout the years. But it relies heavily on the psalms. Then, if it's morning or nighttime, you're going to see the Shema, right, that we discussed before, that fundamental catchphrase of our faith. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. That is going to be there, surrounded by some blessings that come before and after it. Then we're going to see the Amidah. I've spoken about this, but now I'm letting you kind of see it systematically, which is the central prayer that replaced the offerings. Depending on the day, depending on the time, sometimes there'll be a Torah reading. If it's Monday or Thursday morning, we'll have a Torah reading. If it's Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon, we'll have Torah readings. If it's a festival day, we'll have special Torah readings. But otherwise, we don't. Right? A regular Tuesday, evening, we just had services here right before I came to class. It was a 15-minute service, and there was no Torah readings. It was just the very basics of the prayer service. Sometimes there's a second Amidah, if it's Shabbat or festivals, because on those days, there was actually a second offering that was offered in the temple. You did your normal daily offering, and now you've got a second one because it's a special day. And then you have closing prayers, right? And give or take a little bit more, a little bit less, this is the structure of all of our services. And it's fixed, right? A Thursday morning service is going to sound like a Thursday morning service every single Thursday morning, unless there's something special going on. And the Shema is the Shema. The words don't change. The Amidah is the Amidah. The words don't change unless we're trying to talk about a different season or something special. But those are intentional changes, not willy-nilly changes. Because this is a fixed liturgy. Rona.
Were there offerings on Shabbat?
Yes, 2 offerings.
That's kind of contradictory in my head.
Well, it's certainly contradictory to what we can do nowadays, but because it was the temple, they were able to do offerings. Absolutely. Okay. So we have this idea of fixed liturgy. And what that does then is it creates a problem for us with 2 different concepts. And the Hebrew words for the concepts are kavanah and keva. Now, keva we've already talked about. Keva is the root of being fixed, right? So keva is the fixed liturgy. It's regular. It's formed, right? It's pre-done for us. Kavanah is the Hebrew word for intention or feeling almost, right? And when we pray, we're supposed to pray with kavanah, with intentional. We're supposed to feel it. So kavanah is that intentionality, that feeling, that meaning that we have behind our prayers. And what's interesting is these 2 concepts actually pull us in opposite directions. The more fixed our prayer is, the more rote and routine our prayer is, potentially the less kavanah we're going to feel. Because I don't have to think about it. I can just go, I can run through and anybody who's been in a synagogue that prays all the time and prays often, especially in some of the Orthodox synagogues, sometimes you sort of feel like they're going through it and there's no feeling to it, right? Now, if you're in a place where you have a good leader that can instill some of that, that's awesome. But look, sometimes we're just hurrying to get to work and we have to do this and let's go. We have to do this. Now we're moving on. And it's all about the keva. And you sort of say, well, wait, where's the feeling? Where's the intentionality? Now, by the same token, right, I can create a service that's beautiful with all these long, beautiful songs that we can all sing together, but then none of us would ever get to work, right? So we have to, in our lives, find the balance between kavanah and keva. And there are going to be times that we lean more into keva because we're in a hurry. There are going to be times that we lean more into kavanah because we've got the time. Shabbat is supposed to be more into kavanah than keva. We've got time to be there. We're not in a rush. We're not going to work. Maybe we're hungry for lunch. But other than that, we're not really hurrying, right? And so we've got time to spread out the prayer, have more of conversations. I would never do a sermon or a conversation on a Tuesday night. People got things to do, right? We need to go. We need to do what we need to do. So these ideas are both critical, and we recognize that there's a dynamic tension between them. And we sort of go back and forth between the two, depending on what our needs are at that given moment. Now, the other piece that really plays into this conversation of kavanah and keva is actually the language that we use, right? Because our language is fixed as Hebrew. That's the language that our prayers are fixed in. That's the language that our prayers are written in. And yet, if you don't speak Hebrew, it's going to be hard to have kavanah if you don't understand what you're saying. So the conversation of the language of prayer has actually been a huge conversation over the ages. And we'll see that different denominations actually have dealt with it differently. But Hebrew creates a challenge for those people who are finding or trying to find meaning in the liturgy unless you understand Hebrew fluently. And even still, by the way, a lot of the prayers are more archaic forms of Hebrew. It's like reading Shakespeare sometimes, right? It's still English, but it's a different form. And so if you speak modern Hebrew, you're not necessarily going to understand all of the nuance and all of the depth of the prayers. In the same way that if you speak English, you have to train yourself how to understand Shakespearean Hebrew or Shakespearean English or Canterbury Tales or something like that, right? It's a different English. Canterbury Tales for sure. So the language creates this kavanah keva argument. So how are we supposed to feel the prayers when it's in Hebrew? Now, the Reform movement addressed this by changing most of the liturgy into English, or whatever the lingua franca is. If you're in France, it's in French. If you're in Germany, it's in German, right? Which is where the Reform movement originated. But here in the United States, if you go to a classical Reform synagogue, much of the prayer is going to be in English, although they've now swung back a little bit and started to add more Hebrew into the prayers, but much of it is still going to be in English. The challenge is by doing that, they've lost something. They've lost that original beauty of the prayer. And so I want to share with you an excerpt from a book, which I highly recommend for those people who are interested in learning more about Jewish prayer. The book is called Entering Jewish Prayer by Rabbi Reuven Hammer. Highly recommend it. And he writes as follows about Hebrew language. And I can't say it better than him, so we can read it and we can talk about it. The language of Jewish prayer is Hebrew. Certainly it's permissible to pray in any language. The sages of the Mishnah indicated how important they thought it was that we understood what we say. These may be said in any language. And there's a series of prayers that they say, you can say these in any language you want. If that is so, what need is there for the non-Hebrew speaker to pray in Hebrew? Franz Rosenzweig, who is a philosopher, remarked that the uncomprehended Hebrew gives him more than the finest translation. Right? There's something about praying in Hebrew that's more than just, am I understanding every word? Jewish prayer means praying in Hebrew. There is an emotional element that reciting prayer in Hebrew can add even to those who don't comprehend every word. There's a feeling of identification with an ancient tradition and with other Jews, wherever they may be, that enhances the experience. I can go anywhere in the world. I don't speak German, but I can go to Germany and I can pray if I need to, because we're speaking Hebrew. It connects every Jew around the world by being able to do that. There's nothing magical in Hebrew, but there is something culturally meaningful that is lost when traditional prayers are said in other languages. Obviously, the more one knows the text in the original, the better. The real meaning of the text lies in its original language. The terms that are used, the multiple meanings and echoes within them can seldom be fully conveyed in translation. Hebrew is indispensable if one wishes to participate in communal Jewish prayer in any traditional synagogue. Although Judaism has a tradition of individual prayer, it nevertheless places extraordinary emphasis on community worship. The individual may express himself in whatever words he desires, but when taking part in community prayer, one must also join the framework that has been accepted by the community. And that's Hebrew. That connects us. So what do I say to people who say to me, well, wait a second, I don't know Hebrew yet. How do I pray? So I will suggest that when you come to services and you're learning, first of all, those who are in the basic Judaism class and who are converting will be taking a class next semester, and we'll talk about when that is, that is Hebrew decoding, Hebrew language, and it'll be right after this class, actually. Starting after in Basic Judaism 3, it'll be Basic Judaism 3, and then right afterwards will be Hebrew language. And Elisheva is going to be teaching decoding, so you can learn how to read Hebrew. But aside from that, once you have learned how to do that, you're still going to have to learn the prayers. And so what I encourage you to do is to take a prayer that you want to focus on. Maybe it's the Shema and the paragraph immediately after that. And that's the prayer that you're focusing on in Hebrew. And every time we're praying that, you're going to be looking at it, you're going to be following along in Hebrew and learning. And the rest of the prayers, you're going to do in English. And then when you learn that prayer, you're going to then move on to another prayer. You're going to move on to another prayer. And then that's how you're going to learn the prayers ultimately in Hebrew. Not trying to do it all at once because it's overwhelming, but taking it one prayer at a time. And then you'll learn the prayers. And it won't take anywhere near as long as you think, but it does mean you have to be a more regular shul goer if you want to learn the prayers. It's going to take that time of coming, of being exposed to it, of hearing the melodies, of hearing the words, and being able to learn it that way. Which sort of leads us to our next topic, community of prayer, right? And we can certainly pray alone. There's no problem praying alone. And I've been all over the world and I've prayed, all by myself. I've done the fixed liturgy all by myself. Obviously, you have to know it in order to do that. But if you have a prayer book with you, you can do that. But there is something, as Rabbi Hammer mentioned, there's something powerful about praying in a community. And in Judaism, we call that community a minyan, which is a prayer quorum. It is 10 Jewish adults over the age of bar or bat mitzvah. In the Orthodox world, it will only be 10 males. But in the conservative and reform world, it is 10 Jewish adults, male or female, over the age of bar or bat mitzvah. Now, you do need to be Jewish to count in a quorum. And so we are very much waiting for Cheyenne and Vard to finish their process, since they're usually there right at the very beginning. And we wish we could count you in our 10 right away as we go. but we'll get there. I promise we'll get there. And there are certain prayers that can only be said if you have a minyan. And if you don't have a minyan, you can't say those prayers. You can do other prayers, but you can't say those prayers. So what are the prayers? The public Torah reading, right? We can't read Torah from the Torah out loud like that unless there's a minyan there. Now, that doesn't mean you can't study Torah on your own and decide to look at the weekly portion. That's totally fine. But to read from the Torah out of the Torah, like we do on Saturday mornings, you have to have a minyan there. The Kedusha section of the Amidah, there's a section that can only be said if there's a minyan there. And if there's not, you skip that page and actually do a short little blessing instead. And most importantly for most people is the Kaddish. Now the Kaddish is known as the mourner's prayer. And if you are mourning, you want to be able to say the Kaddish. But you can't say it if there's no minyan. And so it creates this need for a community to come together when somebody is mourning, which I find very beautiful and incredibly powerful, right? We don't want people to be on their own saying Kaddish in mourning. And that's, if you ever look at an animal who's in pain, right? What do? They tend to separate themselves off from the pack. They separate themselves off. They go somewhere by themselves, right? And for many of us, when we're hurting, we kind of close ourselves off, and that's what we want to do. And our tradition actually forces us to do the opposite and to say, we know you're hurting, but you're going to do that in a community because now you have people to support you. And now you have people to take care of you. And now you have people to share, if not your exact pain, well, they've felt the same pain also when they've lost people. And so they can be there for you and walk with you. So,
Rabbi?
Yeah, go ahead, Manya.
Can somebody substitute who is not Jewish to have a minyan?
No. In order to be counted in a minyan, you have to be under the obligation of the mitzvot. And you're not under the obligation of the mitzvot until you're Jewish. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So we talked about this a little bit, but learning prayer. First, remember that you can pray to God anytime you want to with any words. Right? Don't forget about that first piece of all of this. And so I'll tell you a story that I've mentioned to you before, that I was a chaplain at Robert Wood at NYU Medical Center when I was first learning to be a rabbi. I was in rabbinical school, and I had a rabbi who was my supervisor, which is very unusual. Most of the chaplaincy programs are run and are filled with Christian clergy who much more go into chaplaincy than Jewish clergy does. But this particular, my supervisor happened to be a rabbi, which was great because I could really talk to her about my challenges and all of this. And what she noticed is, as I went around and as I talked to people, I wasn't praying with them. I was using my rabbi's manual. I'd do a psalm, or I'd do a Misha Berach, which is a prayer for healing, all of which are great. But she said to me, David, I want you to start to learn how to pray with people more spontaneously. And I said to her, well, we don't do that. I said, well, actually we do. We talked about some of this stuff. But as Jews, we've really moved away from that because it's become in our heads such a Christian thing to do, to kind of just pray together. And so she said, I want you every single day to find one patient and just pray with them. Don't use your book. Don't use your Psalms. Don't use anything. Just pray. It was a very difficult assignment for me, and I was uncomfortable with it because it's not something that I know how to do really well, right? My Christian colleagues, you ask them to pray, they'll get together, they'll bow their heads, and out comes this beautiful prayer, right? That's not my shtick. We don't know how to do that. So a week went by and I had my next meeting with my supervisor. And, we did what are called verbatims, where we actually wrote out the conversation that we had with this person. And I showed her, these are the people that I prayed with. And she looked at it. She said, I'm noticing something very interesting about all the people that you're choosing to pray with. I said, oh. She said, I noticed that they're all Christian. None of them are Jewish. I said, yeah. I said, I figured one of us should know what we're doing, right? It was this idea. It's so foreign, it seems. But the more I learned about it, the more I was able to incorporate spontaneous prayer into my life, into my rabbinate. Certainly when I'm dealing with people who are in crisis, the ability to take what they're going through and offer those feelings and those ideas up as a prayer to God is very powerful. So I want to encourage you to continue to pray. Use that time to be able to do that. Whether it's the fixed prayer, you don't need to have your conversation with God only be about the fixed prayer. It can be personal as well. And then dedicate time to learning the liturgy, right? You can do it by yourself, but it's much more effective coming to services, being here. There are some of you that are here pretty much every week, right? If you want to come and to learn about prayer and you don't want to feel like you're uncomfortable, you can sit with Bart and Cheyenne or Mike and Manya or Ebony and Brian and the kids. They're there, right? Go sit with them, hang out with them. You know them, right? If you want to go check out the Beit Midrash Minyan, Rona's in that, right? And so look at the faces of the people that are here. You won't be alone. You won't be alone. And even if you are, most of the people there are very friendly. Sit next to somebody and say, what page are we on? And they'll tell you. It's not a problem. Don't feel like you're interrupting anybody. But this group, there are people that are pretty much there, I would say almost every week, between Mike and Manya, Bart and Cheyenne, and Ebony and Brian and the kids. And you are absolutely, you should feel free to come and join them. And then, as I said, select a prayer to work on in the Hebrew. Start with some of the most common, more important. Read the rest in English so that you can understand and feel the rhythm of the prayer. And Ebony has a great book to learn about prayer as well. It's hard to see with the, hold on, I've got a better, hold on. This is called My People's Prayer Book. And I'm backwards. I got a new camera and I'm backwards. But anyhow, this is the Shmonet's Blessing, My People's Prayer Book. Let me try to fix this for you. Sorry. Aha, there we go. Much better. This is something that you can do when you want to learn more about the prayers. It's a bunch of volumes, but for the beginning, just start with the English translations that are inside of the book, and actually the new Sidurim we have a lot of explanation and interpretation around them. You don't need to go out and buy anything else. Just come and use the Sidurim, use the prayer books that we have. As you learn, more about the services, as you learn more Hebrew, then you're going to be able to move on to the next prayer and continue and continue and continue. So I want to just remind people what we're doing next week. And then I do want to open it up, actually, and I'll take us off share. That's why I'll do that in a second. I want to open it up to those people who do come to services on a regular basis. And just to talk a little bit about A, why you come, B, what moves you at the services? What are the things that you appreciate or you really resonate to? And maybe some advice that you may have to people who aren't as familiar and haven't come to services. And so just as a reminder, next week, it'll be the last of our Basic Judaism 2 before we start Basic Judaism 3, the history section. And we're going to talk about the dynamic nature of Judaism by really digging into a very particular story from the Talmud, and then sort of a wrap up, kind of bringing everything all together. All right. So, who would like to share from the people who sort of show up on a regular basis? And the great thing about it is some of the people who show up are there because they're Jewish and they've been showing up for a long time, and some of the people are not yet Jewish and are still showing up. And so we have both sort of categories of people that are there. But who'd like to begin? Rona.
For me, it's it's the music and the melody that really internalizes prayer for me. So I find that to be a really important part. And the familiarity with the melodies encompasses a lot of things. And because I grew up Jewish, there are a lot of childhood memories and family memories that are associated with that. But the music really helps me with the kavanah and also with learning the prayers.
Nice. Very nice. Manya? Hold on, you have to unmute. There you go.
I'm waiting for the day when Shabbat comes. I know when I grew up, we were Orthodox Jews, and a lot of things you couldn't do on Shabbos, and that's how I was raised. So I am waiting, and in the meantime, when I am supposed to do something and I don't want to do on Shabbat, so I am talking to myself and God, no, I am not going to do it. And so that is to me very important. And it's also a tremendous feeling, you forget the outside world with other things, what it goes on, and you just sit and pray. But it is difficult. We don't speak Hebrew, so when you read, you don't know the translation of it. So that is a negative thing.
Yeah, you have to look, you have to read along on the English side.
Yes,
in order to figure out what you're saying.
So it is very important for us to go to the temple, and it is a wonderful, wonderful day.
Wonderful. We love having you there. Somebody else?
We got married in Buffalo, and our rabbi was Rabbi Isaac Klein, who was a very special man, and it became custom that we would go all the time. And when we came to San Diego, temple, Betham became our replacement for the Buffalo temple, and both rabbis, both rabbis are very inspirational, and we like to come every Saturday for that.
Thank you, Mike. Somebody else? Can I put Nancy? Go ahead.
Well, I don't always come to synagogue, but I watch online, and I guess maybe that requires a little bit of discussion in terms of, what is it? This is something that we started during, COVID, and it was a necessity, and now it's not a necessity, but it's convenient. So, I mean, I definitely feel a difference whether, if I'm in synagogue or if I'm participating from home. The things that the reason why I come all the time is for the Torah portion and your sermon, and the way it, in particular, the discussion that you read that brings out some particular aspect of the Torah portion. and then I read my Jonathan Sacks as well. And for me, it's learning and it's the learning and deepening experience of my relationship to the Torah itself.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. So we've heard from all the people, from many of the people who've grown up Jewish. Now I'm going to put some of you on the spot who show up who aren't Jewish. Why do you guys come? Aren't Jewish yet. Brian.
Well, I mean, for me, like one of the interesting things is coming from our Orthodox synagogue in France is that the melodies are actually almost entirely different. Because here it's more Ashkenazi and there it's more Mizrahim, and so it was a really interesting kind of change and experience for me to notice that like all the melodies are different. But in both synagogues, I come because it helps me, because I don't read or speak the Hebrew yet. It helps me get some of the feeling and the emotion of the prayer, where I wouldn't really get that just reading a translation book. I get to see, because I wasn't brought up Jewish, I get to see how other people do it, how other people experience it, and how other people really, live through the prayers that they're saying.
Yeah, and
that adds so much to it.
There's a whole almost ritual of when we stand and when we sit.
Yeah,
I used to teach a class called Tefillah Aerobics, right, which actually just teaching how to stand and when to sit and all those sorts of things, when to bow. That's all part of it. Good. Thank you, Brian.
Can I say another thing?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, and then we'll go to Cheyenne.
Right. When I was in Brussels, I have a synagogue in Brussels also that I attend whenever I'm there, and they're more progressive. But the thing that never changes from one flavor to another is reading the Torah. Mm-hmm. And that is, certain of the prayers, like Shema, for example, those don't change either, but a lot of the other ones do. But when you read the Torah, it's more fixed. That's a stable leveling that's across all the flavors of.
Yeah, agreed. And the challenge is we only read Torah certain days a week. We don't do it every single day, but it definitely gives us the opportunity to engage the intellectual side of us, right? If the music and the prayers engage the spiritual side, the Torah and the conversation engages the intellectual side. One of the things that makes a Shabbat service so complete is that we're actually engaging all of who we are as we go. Cheyenne.
So I remember the first time that we came and experienced the service. It was a bat mitzvah that day. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, are we at the right place? Or we were kind of not sure what was going on. But I'm so glad that we came that day, because it was such a beautiful ceremony, and the girl, it was just so great, like seeing how the whole family was participating, and all of this studying that the young girl had done. And it was really, really intriguing and exciting to me to see like that family dynamic that I kind of like always wished that I had. Mm-hmm. And I was pregnant at the time, and I thought, oh, this is just looks wonderful for a family experience. And we kept coming after that, because it just felt like something good to do with your day. It was like a good addition to life that I didn't even know that I was missing, you know, and having those prayers and just learning every day from everyone and that community experience, it was just like the best addition to my life, you know, besides getting married and having kids. I love it. We love coming.
Well, we're glad you're there.
And the lunch, yeah.
Free lunches.
Well, in the lunch, yeah. I mean, you know, there's always a luncheon, and it's always an opportunity to come and meet with the community
And meet people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank
And
you.
I'm glad to see that you got the Purim costume off of your baby's face.
Yeah. Lots of baby wipes.
I'll
ahead,
just
Ebony.
say, I'll just say quickly, I prayer is one of my favorite aspects of Judaism. I feel I love that you had like a class on tefillah aerobics, because I actually feel that it nourishes and works out my spiritual muscle. And each time that I'm praying, I get closer to Hashem. When I first came to shul, I was very young. I think I was 12. I was going to bar and bat mitzvahs every weekend as a middle schooler, and I just immediately heard a cantor singing, I think it was the Shema. And I was like, I just started crying, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is where I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be like hearing these nusas. I'm supposed to be like, it just like awoken my Kavanaugh, and like I've just been like growing and healing, I feel like, ever since that time. And everybody at Beth Am is so amazing and sweet and welcoming, and they've just been so amazing to our family of like crazy kids and like our strollers and stuff that
You're
we
not the
show up
first,
with
you won't be the
every
last.
yeah, so it's really great to have that too.
Good. Well, look, I mean, you know, the music, the words, the community, right, all come together to create a little bit of an alchemy that is unique. And every synagogue is going to be different. And they should be, right? It doesn't surprise me when Ebony, you and Brian talk about, well, this is different than it is in France. Because every community is different. And if it was all cookie cutter, we would actually lose the diversity that we have within who we are, and the originality, and every community finds that rhythm of what makes it go, what makes it tick. Many of you have been to Campfire Shabbat here. That's a big part of who we are. Some of you have been to what we call Zimrat Yah, which ended before, you know, because of COVID, and we're now starting to bring it back. Zimrat Yah is actually during the weekday service, and it's a much more meditative type of service with a lot of singing and a lot of music. And so when that comes back, you'll all hear about it, and I'll encourage you to come join us for that, because it's really something spectacular. You know, it
used to do a service with lots of music.
Say it again.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that.
Oh, no. Okay. Yeah, you were on yes, it's a musical service, you know, that we do during the day as opposed to just at night. And Campfire Shabbat is much more sort of campy. We want to get people going and get those juices sort of flowing. Zimrat Yah, I think the first time we did Zimrat Yah, we did 8 songs total, and it took us 45 minutes. Because it was just meditative and slow, and we repeated and we built, and it was just really, really nice. So when that comes, you'll see there's lots of different ways to engage in prayer. And Beth Am has multiple modalities, but there are other synagogues out there that have other modalities as well. And, you know, don't be afraid to give them a try and see what's out there, you know, because there's a lot of different ways that the community comes together in prayer, because it's the way we speak to God. And therefore, it has to have a bit of us in it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. So that's our unit on prayer. Next week, we will get together for the final Basic Judaism 2. And then the week after, we start again with Basic Judaism 3. So there's no break in the winter time. The last one, we had a break in between because of winter vacation. But this one, there's no break. Basic Judaism 2. Next week is Basic Judaism 3, where we start talking about history. All right. I will see you guys all soon, my friends.
Okay, Toda, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Have a good night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Good night.